Hi. In this video, I'll cover the introductions and the stories in the 10th Thieves World anthology, which is called Aftermath. The introduction was written once again by Robert Lynn Asprin. Hakim, the storyteller turned basic advisor, and Hort, the fisherman's son turned storyteller, are watching the stepsons leave Sanctuary. Hakim acts happy to see the mercenary soldiers go, though he's a little concerned about the coming struggle with the new Emperor Theron. There's also a brief dialogue about some people that have disappeared without a trace and the mystery of what happened to them there. It's a 3.5-page info dump vignette intended to tell you the current situation in Sanctuary. There's really not much to it since it's just background info for upcoming stories in this volume. I'd rate it about a 5 out of 10. The next story is called Cade and was written by Mark C. Perry. When I looked Perry up on the isfdb.org site, he didn't have much output. This is his only entry in Thieves World as well. Cade is a character who left Sanctuary 11 years before the story, and he made his fortune as an assassin. He left poor and made enough money to buy his brother, a guy named Terrell, a house and provide funds for Terrell to start his own business. Unfortunately, Terrell was recently brutally murdered, and Cade has returned to find out why. The story is entertaining if you like conflicted tough guy characters. Cade's formative years were in Downwind, which is the worst part of Sanctuary, and when he has to venture there during his investigation, he really doesn't want to go. It brings up too many painful memories for him. Cade comes across like a guy that might be looking for redemption, even though he justifies his assassination jobs with his own personal code about who he'll kill. At one point in the story, he meets a young man in Downwind and doesn't know whether to kill him or take him under his wing. He's very conflicted about it. When it was written, I don't know how fantasy formulaic it may have been, but today it seems like other stories I've read more than once. I do like the tough guy characters, and since Perry doesn't appear to have written anything else for Thieves World, I'm hoping the other authors will use Cade and at least one other character from this story in their own stories in the future. I'm giving this a 7 out of 10 rating. The next story is Wake of the Riddler by Janet Morris. If you didn't know, Riddler is the war name of Tempest, the nearly immortal earthly avatar of the god Vashanka. This starts off with Critias, who is now in charge of the Sanctuary Militia, which it's hard to say if that's really what it is. He's been tasked to find someone, and he's waiting for a contact that may have some information for him. Then it jumps to soldiers Kama and Stratton talking about Zip, the leader of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Sanctuary, and his altar building activity before jumping to Zip and what he's actually doing. All three points of view do a lot of thinking about their current situation, but it's easily followed if you've read all the stories up to this point. If you haven't, good luck. There may be some confusing stuff in there for you. As with many of the previous stories that Janice Morris has written, this one feels like another chapter in an ongoing saga, so there isn't really a traditional beginning, middle, and end to the story. It does introduce a new character near the end, and if he's who I think he is, I'm not super thrilled about it, but I'll let you discover that on your own. I didn't have the just get on with it feeling that I've had with some of the previous multi-viewpoint stories that writers Morris and Cherry have written. However, I'd still only rate this story a 5 out of 10, which means it's hovering around average, but more on the lower end. The next story is called Inheritor, and it's David Drake's last story for Thieves World that I know of. Caravan Master Samler Hill Samt is once again in Sanctuary because of his sister. This tale starts off with Samler and his 7-year-old niece Star in the Vulgar Unicorn Tavern. Samler's a bit paranoid about being recognized since he thinks there are people in Sanctuary that want to kill him. When Samler and Star sit down with some drinks, a man gets pushy about selling Samler a dagger, and then an all-out fight breaks out because of Samler's reaction to the guy, and then the story progresses from there. There isn't any additional character development for Samler or his niece Star. A new wizard character named Kamwas was introduced, and he has an interesting companion who I think was maybe meant as comic relief, but it really didn't hit for me. I have to admit that aside from Christopher Moore stuff, humor in written form is a tough sell for me anyway, so I don't always recognize it for what it is or like it when I do recognize it. Samler has been one of the characters I liked a lot in the Thieves World setting. He has unfortunately always been a bit of a side character who comes and goes with David Drake's availability to write a story. Drake did write a novel called Dagger with Samler as the main character, but I don't think it's readily available. If I can track down a copy of it, I'll give it a read and review it here eventually. At 73 pages, I think this is the longest story that I've seen in the Thieves World books. Unfortunately, it doesn't live up to the length of the story. Drake's tendency to overdescribe creeps through the story with many details that are just kind of atmosphere building, which isn't bad, but there's a little too much of it. There are really only 3 scenes in the story, and it all reads like a side quest that you might use in your next Dungeons and Dragons campaign, especially the final scene, which makes up more than half the story. For such a long story, the ending happens quite abruptly, and there's no real cool down scene after the final conflict, so we don't even really find out why Camwas was so interested in his objective in the story. The young Dungeons and Dragons fan in me was entertained, but the older, more discerning reader felt like the story dragged quite a bit. Add that to the story being too long, then having an abrupt, unsatisfying ending, and I can't rate this any higher than a 3 out of 10, which is unfortunate because I really like the character of Samler. The fourth story in Aftermath is called Mercy Worse Than None. It's by John Brunner, and it brings back a couple characters from Sentences of Death all the way back in the first Thieves World book, called just Thieves World. It starts off with Melalot, the scriptorium owner, hosting his traveling employee Jarvina and someone she's trying to help that's named Klikata. Klikata gets really upset when Melalot invites him to dinner the next night. When Klikata leaves the room, Jarvina explains the guy's reaction. The story asks the question, how long is a punishment supposed to be, even when the crime is incredibly horrendous? Unfortunately, it barely puts forth an effort to propose an answer. The story itself is a bit stripped down, and a great deal of it is one character telling another what has happened. Coming from such an experienced writer, the story was disappointing. Since barely anything of significance happened in it, I'd give it a 4 out of 10, but only because it asked an interesting question. The fifth story in this volume is by Lynn Abbey and is titled Seeing is Believing, but Love is Blind. In this one, the half-Sedanzo fortune teller Elira is caring for a baby that her half-brother Wallagren brought her because its mother had died. Elira's own daughter was killed during some riots the previous year, and she's having a tough time dealing with it. However, she doesn't think of this child as hers, more as a replacement, and she goes looking for solace and a quiet place to think about everything. The main theme of the story is basically dealing with grief. Elira still hasn't recovered from her daughter Lilith's death the year before. The child that Wallagren and Elira's husband Dubro thought might snap her out of her mourning seems to just be a reminder of what she lost and will never have again. It starts off as a sad story and progresses from there, with Elira having a couple experiences that kind of challenge her frame of mind. It's not a rock your world kind of story unless you're going through something similar, which I definitely hope that you're not doing. I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. The closing story in Aftermath is by Andrew Offutt. We return to Spellmaster Stricka Farika, and an old friend comes back into town in a story called Homecoming. This one starts off with customs agent Cusherlane and his mistress realizing that her earrings have been stolen. Based on where Cusherlane's apartment is, he's pretty confident that only one person he knows could have taken them, but that person's been absent from Sanctuary for quite a while now. The story then jumps to Strick's business, where he helps people using his spell talents. After a customer leaves, someone sneaks into Strick's office, surprising him, and the rest of the story flows from there. The story's entertaining and written well, though I'd say it's a little short on action. I think the task in one of the scenes was a little too easy, though I will say that Offutt kind of hinted that it might be easy when he wrote it. The story gave just enough of the characters' thoughts and recent history to make them more than cardboard cutouts. The end of the story has some serious implications for one of the characters and ties back to something that was said in the introduction story of this book. I liked the story overall, and it made a mostly positive outlook on Sanctuary. I would have to give this one a 7 out of 10. And that closes out Aftermath, the 10th of the original 12 volumes in Thieves World. I'd say the story quality in this one trended back into the negative. The one story I was really looking forward to was a big disappointment, and most of the others were only marginally better. The disappearing people mentioned in the introduction only came into play as a minor subplot in one story and as a major element in the very last story, so once again, an introduction promise went unfulfilled in this book. The average ratings of the individual stories in this one bring it to a 5 out of 10 rating. It had some good material in it, but only a couple of the stories really had plots or characters that captured my interest that much. If you've read these before, I hope the reviews brought back some memories and made you want to reread the books. If you've never read them before, hopefully this will give you some incentive to look them up. Until next time, keep reading, my friends, and bye for now.